Hello, I'm Dr. Gaynell Stone. I'm an archaeologist and anthropologist and the director of the Long Island Culture History Lab and Museum, which has two sites, a native life and archaeology site at Hoyt Farm Park in Commack and a colonial life and technology site at Blydenburg County Park in Smithtown. And what we're looking at here today are some very old buildings which we know predate the site of this farm. This has been the Sherrill farm since 1792, and as we have disassembled this old shop building today, we've discovered all kinds of architectural features which tell us this could even be a building from the 1600s, certainly the 1700s. But very unique things about this building that no one guessed were there. We, meaning volunteers from the Suffolk County Archaeological Association, have come out to disassemble these buildings so that we can save them and we can take the fabric that is salvageable back to Blydenburg County Park, where we will re-erect them and use them as part of our museum program, so that children can see the wonderful workmanship, craftsmanship, ingenuity that people practiced back in those days. Now, we found a lot of surprising things here today already. And one of them is the fact that the way this building is built is probably more 1600s, certainly 1700s, rather than later in time. Also, the men believe that the same man who built this shed also built this barn, which is over here next to us. And what we found as we took it apart, well, these are called bird mouth joints. This is a special way of having the ceiling joist come down and rest on the top beam in the building. So far, I've only seen that kind of joint in a 1680 house in Stony Brook called the Longbottom House, and I've seen it at the Mulford Farm in that little dairying building they've added onto it. They have this kind of birdmouth joint there. And there are some architectural historians who believe that this is a Dutch influence on Long Island. And we do know there were early Dutch people here in East Hampton, the Lopers and the Skellingers and so forth. So who knows if some of them brought this carpentering tradition from Manhattan and western Long Island out here to East Hampton. We found a number of interesting things about this building. This is the former part of a ship that was being used as a collar beam in the building to hold it up. And according to the men who were doing the work here, it's very fine work. It's the work of a shipwright rather than the work of a carpenter. It's also chestnut, which was one of the early woods used on Long Island. Another unique thing we found is some beautiful, probably 18th century paneling, which is the kind of paneling that people put around their fireplaces and using to make their wainscots in houses, usually in the early 1700s, mid 1700s. So this was probably being recycled and reused from a house somewhere and was just used inside of this, what was called the shop. It was always called the Sherrill shop. What are you guys talking about?
What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about why they made this sill out of red oak and not out of white oak. And that's basically what we're thinking about now, is why they used an inferior piece of wood. When at the time when this was built, there was plenty of wood around. You know, it's not a normal. Normally they'd use white oak, walnut, or locust for that beam there. And
this piece right
this piece right there. Yeah, it's much.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jim. You do it.
Okay.
It's much further along. It's much heavier decayed than the rest of them. It's because it's a piece of red oak and not a.
And what do you think is the reason that they did use that?
Well, we're thinking that he started to run out of wood, or it was just too much trouble. It was just easier or handier to have at the time, you know.
Jim Cassidy, and I'm the blacksmithing demonstrator for Suffolk County Archaeological Association. And I'm here to help save some of the old structures that are here. We're going to be taking the barn down and reassembling it at Blydenburg Park in Smithtown. And parts of the workshop, which we just dismantled, will be used in repairing the barn and repairing another structure, because the workshop was so badly damaged. The interesting thing about it, though, was that the joints that were used and the way it was assembled was most consistent with a shipbuilder than a house wright, or house builder. The amazing joints in the building. The corner joint was without getting crazy with it, It was double pegged, and it was into both of the upper beams, and it was beautiful. It was an amazing experience looking at it and knowing that 250 years ago, whenever it was built, that someone took the time to do such beautiful work. When we took this apart, we expected a simple lap, and what we ended up with was this, which is very, very uncommon. Whoever built this to last the centuries. It was extraordinarily well built, extraordinarily well made. The way this went into both plates and then was pegged through. I haven't seen a joint like this here before. And this is what I've heard to refer to as a gunstock post, in that the top of the post goes up, it tapers towards the bottom, goes up to a very, very fat top, which makes sense if you're going to use this kind of joint. Okay? Exceptionally strong, very unusual. And I was astounded to find something of this type of workmanship in a small outbuilding. It's beautiful. That it almost disappeared is amazing in itself. And we came out here and we saw this, and I said, we have to save this. And it's just astounding. Now you can get another view of this joint, and you'll notice the way it's constructed and how it is cut. The edges are chamfered. It's just extraordinarily well made. In terms of joinery, it's beautiful. What we suspect this is part of a hinge for a wagon seat. And our feeling is that it is pre-1800. It's definitely handmade, and it's wrought iron. The nails themselves are handmade. Whether they were handmade in this shop or not, we don't know. We did find a bolt heading anvil. It's a special tool for making bolts. It's well, without getting crazy about it, it's just a simple tool for making a bolt or a nail. A piece of hot iron goes into it, you strike the head, and you form the head of the bolt, and you take it out and then tap it or die it, whatever you have to do to it. This is a beautiful little piece. It was lying in the floorboards in there, and it was actually under somebody's foot when we came up with it. And I haven't seen anything quite like this. It's just a beautiful little piece. What this is a bolt header. And what would happen with this, it would be driven into a stump. There's a spike to hold it in a stump. And what would happen is on the top, you would take a piece of hot steel. It would be brought down, tapered. A head would be formed, and it would be nicked on a cutoff hardy, on an anvil. It would be dropped in here. It would be broken off, and then with hammer blows, you would shape the head, and then it would be popped out through the bottom. And that would, I suspect this is a specific size for making bolts for wagons. It may be a header for making wheel bolts or some other type of bolt. I'm not really sure. I know it is definitely a bolt header. What they were making bolts for, I don't know, but I suspect it was for wagon wheels or something of that nature. It's very, very similar to another tool I've seen for that, although this seems to be a little bit larger diameter than I had seen before. It was definitely a bolt header. And it's a real nice piece, and it's in good condition. As far as I know, that was a chicken house, or chicken coop rather, and what is being discussed now is as to whether it can be moved. The owner of the property would like to have that moved closer to her house. And it is in as poor condition, if not worse, than the condition of the shop was. I would have liked to have saved the entire shop, but we're just saving maybe 25% of it, anything that was worthwhile, anything that wasn't rotted. There's a tremendous amount of rot, powder post beetle. I think there were powder post beetles, definitely carpenter ants. And we're just trying to save as much as we can. But the gentleman that's speaking over there in the green shirt, his business is moving houses. And what I suspect he's talking about now is how to jack that up and move it.
So, my name is Sherrill Foster, and I was born on this property, and so was my brother and my father and my grandfather, and it was built for my grandfather's father when they got married. That's the house they built in 1858. And the reason we're taking these buildings down is because they happen to be on the 30-foot easement to the two 1-acre lots in the back of the 1858 house. And I just happened to meet up with Gaynell Stone and Jim, whatever his last name is, I can't remember. And they decided they needed this on their little farm reconstruction, and they're finding it much more interesting than they thought in the beginning. Now, so this property was bought by my ancestor, Abraham Sherrill. He was a lieutenant in the Revolutionary War in some unit. Can't remember the name of it. And he bought it in 1792. It had a house on it. It had this building and supposedly another barn that has been moved to Amagansett by Skip Sheldon. And so then he gets married in 1800, and he's like 46, and his wife is like 39, and they then have 3 kids, I think. And so that's sort of the beginning of this part of the family and being down here, because the other Sherrills, his father was Recompense Sherrill. He had the house up near the Presbyterian Church, but my ancestor was not the oldest son, so he bought this, and he got 19 acres, but it abutted property he had already inherited from his father. So family owned from Springs-Fireplace Road to Floyd Street to Accabonac to possibly Collins, and so that's why I still have the property. So in 1992, I had the celebration, Sherrill 200 celebration. I had a symposium that was supposed to look at the history of East Hampton through modern research. That was called Maidstone Revisited, because nobody can find anybody that was an early settler of East Hampton that came from Maidstone. So, how come it got that name might be something they brought together in the Victorian era. And so here we are. And this building is called the Shop. There's been a lot of places, and my brother who's here said that he remembered when they moved it here, which was probably in late 60s, early 70s, somewhere time along like that. And so, it's kind of too bad they moved it onto this easement, because I think that my father already knew that was an easement, but maybe he, like me, didn't believe you really ever had to face up to it. So what else you want to know?
My name is Edwin Sherrill, and this was the family farm. And I grew up here with my sister, and I used to have the farm. I sold the farm a number of years ago, and she still has her half. So, but anyway, that's what do you want to know?
What's that building? That long, that tall
thing.
structure?
It's a windmill.
Oh, it is a windmill.
Yeah,
so
well,
the trees weren't that tall.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they didn't have these trees around here then, and that's how they pumped the water for the farm. And that tank used to overflow, and in the wintertime it'd get all full of icicles. That's passé, because the water company has water mains all over the place. And the Suffolk County Water Authority has usurped the efficiency of a windmill. But they were very common. There were lots of them around. And they've been taken down, and they fell down, or something happened to them. Fell disregard. This one here will probably fall down.
Well, this is not the end of the story. This is only the beginning of it. We actually came out here to take down this barn over here, which is, we thought, early 19th century, but judging from some of the framing that we're looking at now, it's probably much earlier than that. Just as this workshop, which we thought was at least 1792, and we now know that it could actually be late 1600s. They'll go back to Blydenburg County Park, and we will use them in recycling another old 19th century building there, which we will turn into a carpentry shop, so that the 60 to 80 school children who come to our museum site there every day for our Colonial Life and Technology program will then have an authentic 19th century working carpentry shop to do their woodworking in. Just as Jim the blacksmith, whom you talked to earlier, runs our forge, and therefore each child gets to blacksmith an object, and of course their mothers never believe that they really did it, but they do, and they go home at the end of a day having done archaeology at a wonderful site, having blacksmithed, having made something with 19th century antique tools, and they've cooked in our 19th century kitchen over a cast iron stove using all kinds of inventive tools and inventions from the 18th and 19th centuries, and we also have a textile workshop, so they're all spinning and weaving. So at the end of the day, they have been immersed in what people had to know how to do throughout human history until recently to survive and to live comfortably. Now, what we will do with the barn is re-erect it at Blydenburg so that we have at least one space there where all 80 children can come in at one time and get an overview of the site. So in effect, will become a museum building and an activity building. So I would say this story is to be continued, because we'll be back here next week shoring up this building and trying to start taking it down piece by piece. And if this is a volunteer effort, if people didn't come and help us do this, these buildings would just rot away or be torn down. So this is our attempt to save some of the material history of Long Island and let the kids today who have no idea of the kind of skill and ingenuity and invention that people from this era had. In fact, some of these joints here today, maybe Jim even told you about them, were so unique that Jerry and Jim can figure that the man who built this shop also built the barn, because it's the same kind of joints, same kind of woodworking technique. So this is like a detective story. All these interesting little things that you never know what you're going to find, and it's a mystery, and it's exciting because you're finding all kinds of things, like the musket balls they found today, the shrapnel, the Revolutionary War bayonet. We didn't expect to find this. We just thought we were taking down an old building to get the wood to be able to reuse it, and instead we found a lot more. It's a very interesting story. If any of you would like to volunteer, get in touch with us. You can call 929-8725, and I can tell you when we'll be back here next and working. And if you'd like to join us, we'd be happy to have you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.